Hi and welcome to this video in which we look at inputting data using the QPSMR Companion. Now you need a full QPSMR Companion license to set up your questionnaire, and I have a questionnaire set up here which I'll explain a little bit more about in a moment. And there's also a free QPSMR Companion license that allows people to do data entry. So if you're working in a situation where one or two people, for example, are preparing the questionnaires, but several people are doing data entry, they just need the free version of the QPSMR Companion to do data entry, whereas people setting up the questionnaire will need the full version to be able to do that. So let's have a look at what we got here. Now we've got a full questionnaire here, and you'll see it's full of entries that begin ZZZ and TTT. And if we go down a little bit further, we'll come to the start of the questionnaire, which is signposted by TTT Start Q. There's sort of what you might call the normal questions, or the questions we're going to ask respondents, with TTT End Q at the end of that, denoting the end of the main questionnaire where we're going to ask questions to respondents. Now, what are all the other things that are about this questionnaire? Well, there's system information and other bits of information that we want to collect automatically. So they might be the name of the person doing the data entry, the time that it happens, the date that it happens, the length of time the interview took, the number of key depressions they made, and so on. So it's collecting system information and information that you're not actually collecting from the respondent themselves. And if you want to have a skeleton questionnaire, you can get that by going to the install file, and there you'll see a skeleton questionnaire. And you'll see in this, there's no questions in this particular skeleton questionnaire. It just goes start queue, end queue, and actually doesn't ask any questions. And that is all available in the QPSMR Tools folder of your installation. So if you go to Program Files x86, NetMR Limited, QPSMR Tools, you'll find 6 or 7 skeleton questionnaires there, which are suitable for paper interviews, CAPI and CATI. Now, CATI is covered as a separate topic in a separate series of videos, but the paper one is the one I'm going to use here, and that has all the controls that I need to control my paper questionnaire. So I'm going to go back to my paper questionnaire, and that's exactly what I copied. And the questions in the middle here, or if you like, towards the end here, question 1 down to age, are the questions on the questionnaire. Now, I don't need to collect all this data. If I didn't want to collect perhaps the name of the computer or the date and time for some reason, I can just delete these ZZZ entries and they just won't be collected. But I think it's good practice so that you've got an audit trail of your project and who's actually keyed in the data for every project so that you can track back any problems and so on. But as I say, you don't need to collect all of that data. All right, so we've got our QDF together here, or our questionnaire together, and it's got our questionnaire in there. We're now ready to actually start doing some data entry. Now, there is a separate video on testing your questionnaire or parts of your questionnaire, which we're not going to go through in this particular video. We're going to look at actually putting in some live data. All right, so we go to the answers menu here, and the first thing that we will need to do is to make an input file. So let's make an input file, and we will change that to live data. And we can choose whether it's a paper interview or a CAPI. And you'll see down the side here, there's all these settings that we allow the person doing data entry to change. So they could go into test mode if they wanted to, if we check this box. So they could override the fact it's live data if they want to practice, for example. They could change, you could check the allow change box, and they could go into testing mode. Of course, they've got to remember not to leave it in testing mode. You can allow them to change the type. You can allow them to change whether they see a list of questions or not, or you could turn the list of questions off and not allow the change. So they don't actually see the list of questions when they're doing data entry down the left-hand column of the data entry scheme. And likewise for these other options here, you can allow them to see filters that are being specified and whether they're being set to true or not. You can allow them to see the ZZ entries. And just to say, the ZZ entries, there's a separate video that covers that topic in full detail as to what all the ZZ entries are. All right, so I'm going to go for live data entry, and I'm going to click OK. And it's going to ask me for a file name, so I'm going to call it test project. And it now asks me whether I want to start doing data entry. Well, I do, so I'm going to click yes. Now, if I was a data entry person, I would distribute the file here so that someone else could use the free version of QPSMR Companion to do data entry. All right, so we're going to go OK, and we're ready to do the first bit of data entry from a paper questionnaire. And this particular questionnaire that we looked at in a separate video has got some filtering in here. So we go back and look what's going to happen. We'll see that everybody answers question 1. There's a filter called FQ1, which is applied to question 3. So unless they say yes at question 1, they don't answer question 3. And then there's a filter on question 4 where they have to give an answer of yes at question 1 and say over 50 kilometres at question 2. And again, they skip that question if they don't fulfil both of those criteria. And in this questionnaire, we've got mainly single questions and integers, and we've got one question, question 5 here, which allows multiple answers so they can pick more than one answer of that particular question. So let's go back to data input, and I can either use the mouse to enter information and hit enter after the response, or I can actually just type the key and it will go on to the next question in paper mode. So if I type 1 here on my keyboard, you can see it's highlighted a 1 and moved it on to the next question. And in the column where we've got the list of questions, remember we could have suppressed that, you'll see it's turned question 1 back to yes. I can type in the number of kilometres. I'm going to put 100 in here and hit enter. So when you enter a number, you have to hit enter because there's no way that QPS knows whether you finish typing after you've typed 1 and 0. So with an integer, you always need to type a number and hit enter. And we go on to question 3, and I'm going to type a 2 off my keyboard. Do I mainly cycle? Yes. So I'm going to type 1 off my keyboard. Now question 5 is a multiple response question, although you'll see that none of these here has been set to a single response only. So that will mean that you can only choose none of these if you've got none of the other answers above, which of course makes perfectly logical sense. If you want one answer, you could just type 3 and it will go on to the next question. And at gender, we can type 2, and at age, we could put 25, and that completes that record. Now let's look at some other routes through this questionnaire. Let's say yes again. Let's say 40 or 30 kilometres. Now we're going to skip question 4. So we're not going to do question 4. And you can already see that's got a brown mark against it to tell us. We type 2 here and we go on to question 5. Now this time I actually want more than one answer at question 5. So if I just type a 3 for cycling today, for example, it will just go on to the next question as it did on the previous questionnaire. So if I want more than one answer here, I have to hit the / key so that it tells QPS to wait at that question. So let's say I want answers 1, 2 and 4. I would type a / key followed by 1, 2 and 4 off my keyboard, then hit the enter key to tell it to move on to the next question. So that was how I did that. / 1, 2, 4, enter. 1 and the age 40. All right, let's go on to another questionnaire. Let's say no to this question, 10 kilometres. And now we've skipped questions 3 and 4. If I try to enter 4 and 7, which would be illogical, I will get an error message coming up because none of these has been set to single, so I can't do that. So I'm going to put a 4 and a 5. And I might need to go back to that question now. And I can use the mouse if I want to at any time. And indeed, I'll use the mouse for the last couple of questions here. 1, move down to here, and I'm going to put the age as 33. And on to the next question. So it's fairly easy to use. You'll see the answers recording down the left-hand side as I type each answer. Here we go. As each answer is entered, there it does. It appears over here. If we made a mistake there, we can just go back to that question. So let's say I only intended to type 20 there rather than 200. I can just go back to that question, enter the answer, and now, of course, it will reroute through the questionnaire. I had 200 before, which meant that it answered question 4. Now I'm putting 20 you can see that it's skipping question 4, and I'm using the mouse this time to answer the question. Pick the answers, and you can see over here the green's highlighting the current question, and the brown one here indicates that that question was skipped. Now that's pretty much all it is to carry out data entry. Very easy to do. Let's have a look in the folder where the project's stored, and if we open this up a little bit wider, you'll see that if I go back to the folder where I was doing this, I've got a QPSMR input file there so that I can input data. That's the file that you can share so other people could do data entry. We're now ready to look at this data, so let's just save it. And if I now convert this data to ASCII, we can actually take a look at it. So we can browse here, find that input file that I just showed you, and let's save this data as my data.asc, and it's written, as you can see, 4 records to that file now. And what it's done for us is given the data location in this column where it says start location of all the data it's collected. Now a lot of that data, as we said at the beginning, is collecting things like the interviewer's name or the data entry person's name and so on, and only the real data actually starts, or respondent data starts, here we are at the 229 data location. So let's have a look at that data and open it up. I'm going to use a product called WinVi to open that, but you can use any editor you like. WinVi I like because it tells you the exact location. So it's saying the record number, you can see my name in here, and you can see some other system data. But if I go to the, here we are, this is the field here, 228 to 230 in the data file is the answer for question 1, and you can see the first respondent I'm highlighting had 001, which is yes. The second had 001, which is yes. The third one, you may recall, said no, and that's 002. And then the distance that they cycled is the next field embedded in that data. So you can look at your data and match it up with what it's saying for the data locations here on this screen if you want to match it up. But that data is now ready to do tabulations. There's a separate video that shows you how to do tabulations when using the QPSMR Companion. But that completes this video on entering your data using the QPSMR Companion. Thank you.